Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or EMDR, is a psychotherapy used for treating trauma and other adverse life events. How well does it work? Well enough to be classed as a best practice or treatment of choice by the US Departments of Defense and Veterans Affairs, and the health departments of both Northern Ireland and Israel. In EMDR, the patient's focus is brought to their trauma memory at the same time that they're given bilateral stimulation. This is often in the form of back and forth eye movements directed by the therapist. The method goes back to 1987 when Francine Shapiro noted her distressing thoughts mellowing as she darted her eyes back and forth. She was walking through a park in Santa Clara at the time. Then psychology student Shapiro began researching the phenomenon, building it into a therapy. Since then, EMDR has helped millions of people across the world recover from psychological trauma. Today we'll hear from experienced EMDR practitioner Dr. Marilyn Luber how she's used this therapy to treat war veterans and other trauma survivors. Welcome to Vital Signs, where we look at how to get healthier from all angles, from the biochemical and nutritional to the things we do that nourish our minds and our souls. I'm Brendon Fallon. Today I'm joined by Dr. Marilyn Luber, who is a clinical psychologist practicing EMDR. She's also an EMDR consultant and an editor of several books on the subject. Dr. Luber, it's a pleasure to have you on Vital Signs. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brendon. Nice to meet you.
Just to start with, I'm interested to know, do you have an example that you could mention of someone you've worked with where you've seen the benefits of this approach?
I had a patient early on who, he was really quite extraordinary, and I think we did 10 EMDR sessions. He was a Riverine, a soldier that was on a boat, or a sailor. I don't remember if it was a sailor or a soldier, but he was on the boat going down the Mekong River. And that was our first EMDR target, and he could not remember what it was. He had been exposed to Agent Orange, which had affected his child. I looked him up prior to this just to talk to him and find out how he was, but he had died a couple of years ago. So he must have died when he was in his 60s, but he had a very good career as a counselor. He went back to school after we had done the work that we did. He came in for originally trauma from the war. When he came back home from Vietnam, his mother was sent a carton of dog food because that's what you feed baby butchers. That was the welcome that Vietnam vets were getting back at that time. And so there were memories like that. And we targeted some of the worst ones. One was when he was with his commanding officer and there was a child and he was running to get the child and his commanding officer stopped him. You know, he felt so terrible because the child exploded, because very often the kids were used to kill American soldiers. And so we've processed through a number of these things. And what it went back to, because EMDR is always about going back to the original root of where the problem started. And, you know, a lot of people did come back from places like Vietnam or World War II, and they did okay. And that may have been because they didn't have trauma that they were building up. So this person had an alcoholic father who sexually abused him. And so that material came up as we did the EMDR work. And so you get a chance to help clear out all of the old material, focus on the present triggers, and then generalize things by going into the future. It's a very powerful treatment. We call that the three-prong protocol. Francine Shapiro, who is a person who started EMDR, and she built in a model from the ground up rather than from a theory coming down. And so she created the three-prong protocol because she found that EMDR was not just about desensitization, which is what she originally thought it was, but in fact something else was happening. And what was happening was the memory was getting reprocessed and changed and really transformed. I had a patient who was in Secret Service, and he was getting a political prisoner out of some country, and he was with his unit. Some loud noise went off, and he was blown through the ground, and so he had a memory of being blown through the ground with only his foot out, which is actually what happened to him. And after the first time we did EMDR on that, he stopped having a nightmare he had been having for 30 years.
And the earlier example about the Vietnam vet, what kind of changes did he see after the...
He said it feels like the log jam in his heart was opened.
Oh.
He also felt like there was a younger part who had a different perspective, who was trying to help him understand what had happened. And so it was like he got that voice back, he got that part of him back. And so he was feeling very graceful. He was a really spiritual person, and EMDR also opens up that channel of spirituality that has been the focus of this conference today as well.
You can follow me at c.vitalscience on Instagram and at Brendon Fallon on Twitter for notice of new videos. With this psychotherapy, my basic understanding is that it involves stimulating left side, right side brain communication.
That's part of it, yep.
So you have this external stimuli, and the traumatic memory is brought into consciousness.
Okay, it's activated.
Activated.
It's activated in a certain way. We don't just say, bring up the memory. We say, what's the worst part of the memory? Take a photo. What's the negative belief you have about yourself? And usually that has something to do with responsibility, safety, choice, or connection, or belonging. For him, something like I'm going to die, or I'm dying, or I'm dead, I think something like that. And the positive is I'm alive. Okay? And so then the other thing that we do is we always are evaluating our work. So we have a validity of cognition, which tests where we are on the scale. How true is I'm alive feeling to you on a scale of 1 to 7, where 7 is true, and 1 is I'm dying or I'm dead. And so we're always checking our work. So it's one of the ways to get evidence-based work in terms of whether there's efficacy or not. So after we get that, right, then we ask for the emotion. We ask for a positive cognition, because one of the things that Francine also put into this mix is she wanted to stimulate the positive neural networks. And even though the person might not be there at that particular time, you're pointing the direction of where to go. And so he said, I'm alive, right? So even though that had not been in his consciousness, perhaps, now it is. We then ask on a 0 to 10 scale how disturbing the whole gestalt is, right? How disturbing the whole memory is. 10 is the most disturbing, 0 is no disturbance or calm in your body. And he said it was a 9. Okay, and then now we're getting ready. The person is getting more into the emotion. We anchor it in the body. Where is it in the body? He felt it in his gut. And we say, okay, bring all of that together. Bring up the image, the negative words that you're saying to yourself, what you're feeling and where you're feeling. And then we do the bilateral stimulation. And so that's where we get the results.